My name is James. I'm 25 years old, and I live in Los Angeles, California. I've always loved taking road trips, especially along Route 66. There's something about the open road, the history, and the feeling of freedom that I can't get enough of. My girlfriend, Rachel, and I had been planning this trip for months, a long drive through the desert, stopping at quirky roadside attractions and forgotten towns. But there's one stop we made that I wish I could forget, something that still makes my skin crawl every time I think about it. We were about halfway through our trip, somewhere near Amboy, California. It's a tiny, almost ghost-like town in the middle of nowhere. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the desolate landscape, and we realized we were running low on gas. There weren't many options out there, but we spotted an old, run-down gas station just off the road. It looked like it hadn't seen much business in years, peeling paint, rusted signs, and a couple of ancient gas pumps that looked like they belonged in a museum. But we didn't have much choice. As we pulled up, I noticed how quiet it was. No cars, no people, just the sound of the wind whistling through the cracked windows of the station. We got out, and a bell rang as we stepped into the small, dusty shop. An elderly man was behind the counter, his back hunched and his eyes hidden behind thick, smudged glasses. He gave us a crooked smile that didn't reach his eyes, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Need some gas?" he asked, his voice gravelly and rough. "Yeah," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Fill it up, please." He nodded slowly and shuffled outside to the pump. Rachel stayed in the car while I watched him through the dirty window. Something about him seemed off, like he was watching us too closely, paying too much attention to every move we made. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself we were just being paranoid. After all, we were in the middle of nowhere, and the place was probably just as creepy as it looked. As the old man filled our tank, I heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel. I turned around and saw a black SUV pulling into the station, its windows tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. 4 men got out, all wearing dark clothes, their faces hard and expressionless. They spoke to each other in hushed tones, glancing repeatedly in our direction, specifically at Rachel. My stomach tightened with unease. I quickly paid the old man, who was now staring at the men with a strange, almost knowing look. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The men in the SUV started walking towards us, one of them grinning darkly. "Nice car," he said, his voice dripping with something sinister. I didn't respond. I just wanted to get out of there. I could see the fear in Rachel's eyes as she clutched the steering wheel, ready to bolt. Without thinking, I jumped into the driver's seat, slammed the car into gear, and floored the gas pedal. The tires squealed as we sped out of the station, the men's faces growing smaller in the rearview mirror. My heart was pounding in my chest, my hands gripping the wheel so tight they hurt. We drove in silence for a few miles, the adrenaline still coursing through our veins. I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see that black SUV following us. But there was nothing, just the empty road stretching out before us. "James," Rachel finally said, her voice trembling. "What?" I asked, glancing over at her. She pointed to the windshield. I hadn't noticed it before, but there was something stuck under one of the wipers. I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands shaking as I reached for the note. It was a small piece of paper, the edges frayed, with a single sentence scrawled across it in messy handwriting. "You can't run forever." My blood ran cold. How had they managed to stick that on our car without us noticing? I crumpled the note in my hand, throwing it to the floor. We didn't speak for the rest of the drive, both of us too rattled to say anything. We made it home without any further incidents, but the fear lingered. A few weeks later, Rachel came running into the living room, her face pale. "James," she whispered, pointing out the window. I looked outside, and there it was, the same black SUV, parked across the street from our apartment. The windows were still tinted, hiding whoever was inside. I watched it for hours, but it never moved. It was just there, a silent reminder that we weren't as safe as we thought. Eventually, the SUV disappeared, but the unease never left. I don't know who those men were or what they wanted, but I do know that they found us once and could easily find us again. Every time I close my eyes, I see that crooked smile, those dark grins, and I wonder if we really escaped or if we're just waiting for whatever's coming next. My name is Brad, I'm 22 years old, and I live in Seattle, Washington. A few months ago, my college buddies Nick, Tyler, and I decided to take a road trip down to California. We wanted to drive along the Oregon coast, see some sights, and just get away from the stress of school for a bit. We had no real plan, just going wherever the road took us. And we were having a great time, until we made the mistake of stopping at a creepy little motel in Klamath Falls. It was late, probably around midnight, when we realized we were too tired to keep driving. We were somewhere along Highway 97, deep in the woods with nothing but darkness around us. When we saw a flickering neon sign for a motel, we figured it was better than sleeping in the car, so we pulled in. The place looked like it hadn't seen any visitors in years. Peeling paint, broken lights, and an air of neglect that made my skin crawl. But we were exhausted, and all we wanted was a place to crash for the night. As I walked into the office to check in, I was greeted by the clerk, a gaunt man with sunken eyes and a piercing stare that seemed to go right through me. He barely said a word as I handed over my ID and credit card, just staring at me the whole time. Finally, as he handed me the room key, he said in a low voice, "Stay in your room after dark. Don't wander around." I laughed it off, thinking he was just trying to mess with us, but something in his tone sent a shiver down my spine. We made our way to the room, which was just as run down as the rest of the place. The wallpaper was peeling, the carpet was stained, and the whole room smelled musty, like it hadn't been cleaned in years. But we were too tired to care, so we threw our bags down and tried to get some sleep. Nick and Tyler were already half asleep by the time I turned out the lights, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The motel was eerily quiet, with only the occasional creak of the building settling. A few hours later, I was jolted awake by the sound of faint whispers outside the door. I froze, straining to hear, but the whispers stopped as quickly as they had started. I figured it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but then I heard footsteps, soft, slow, deliberate, like someone was pacing back and forth outside our room. I held my breath, listening as the footsteps continued for what felt like an eternity. Nick must have heard it too because he suddenly sat up, his eyes wide with fear. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I nodded, my heart racing. Tyler was still asleep, but Nick and I were both on edge, unable to ignore the feeling that someone was watching us. Finally, Nick couldn't take it anymore. He got up and walked over to the window, slowly pulling back the curtains just enough to peek outside. His face went pale as he quickly backed away, his voice shaking. "There's a man out there," he whispered. "He's standing by our car, just staring at our window." I jumped up and joined him at the window, careful not to be seen. Sure enough, there was a man, tall, with a hood pulled over his head, standing perfectly still, his gaze locked on our room. My stomach churned as I realized he wasn't just looking at the motel. He was looking at us, like he knew exactly where we were. We didn't know what to do, so we called the police, hoping they would come quickly. But by the time they arrived, the man was gone, leaving no trace behind. The officers searched the area, but found nothing. They told us it was probably just a drifter or someone trying to scare us, but I could tell they didn't believe it themselves. The next morning, we packed up as quickly as we could, eager to get out of that place. As we approached the car, my heart sank. All 4 tires had been slashed, and a message was scratched into the paint. "You're next." That was it. We threw our bags into the car, and despite the slashed tires, We managed to drive out of there, not caring about the damage. We didn't stop until we were miles away, too freaked out to even talk about what had happened. To this day, I still get chills thinking about that night. I don't know who that man was, what he wanted, or why he was watching us. But I know one thing: I'll never stop at a motel like that again, no matter how tired I am. My name is Eric. I'm 34 years old, and I live in Richmond, Virginia. My wife, Chloe, and I love taking road trips whenever we get a chance, exploring new places, and enjoying the peace that comes with getting away from the city. A few months ago, we decided to take a scenic drive through the Blue Ridge Parkway. The weather was perfect, the leaves were just starting to change, and we felt like we were in for a relaxing weekend. But that trip turned out to be anything but relaxing. We were about halfway through our drive when we spotted a narrow, unmarked dirt road branching off from the main route. I'm not sure what made me want to explore it. Maybe it was just curiosity or the thrill of finding something off the beaten path. Chloe was hesitant, but I convinced her it would be fun, like a little adventure. We had no idea what we were getting ourselves into. As we drove deeper into the woods, the dirt road got rougher. It was clear that this wasn't a well-traveled path. The trees grew closer together, casting long, eerie shadows, and the air felt heavier, almost oppressive. Chloe suggested turning back, but I was determined to see where the road led. That's when we started seeing the signs. They were handmade, scrawled with messages like "turn back" and "danger ahead." We laughed them off, thinking it was someone's idea of a joke. But looking back, we should have taken them more seriously. The road narrowed even further, and before we knew it, our car lurched violently. We had hit something, a spike strip hidden in the dirt. Both of our front tires blew out instantly. I cursed under my breath as we got out to assess the damage. The realization that we were stranded in the middle of nowhere hit us hard. There was no cell service, and the nearest town was miles away. That's when we heard the rustling in the trees. My heart started pounding as Chloe grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with fear. Figures began to emerge from the woods, their faces obscured by dark hoods. There were at least 4 of them, and one of them was carrying a shotgun. My stomach dropped as he aimed it directly at us. "Hand over everything you've got," the man with the shotgun demanded. His voice was low and threatening. Chloe was trembling, and I quickly reached into my pockets, pulling out my wallet and tossing it to the ground. Chloe did the same, and I watched as they rifled through our belongings, taking our phones, cash, and even the keys to our car. The whole time, the man with the shotgun kept his eyes on us, his finger hovering near the trigger. I tried to memorize their faces, but they were careful to keep them hidden. After what felt like an eternity, they finally backed away, disappearing into the trees as quickly as they had come. We were left standing there, shocked and terrified, our car useless and all our belongings gone. Chloe started to cry, and I wrapped my arms around her, trying to figure out what to do next. We were completely alone, stranded in the middle of the woods with no way to call for help. We started walking, hoping to find someone or something that could get us out of there. Hours later, just as the sun was beginning to set, we stumbled upon a small ranger station. The ranger inside was shocked when we told him what had happened. He called the local authorities, and we filed a report. But deep down, I knew they wouldn't find anything. Sure enough, after days of searching, our car was never found. It was as if it had vanished into thin air, along with the people who had ambushed us. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that we were being watched the entire time we were on that road, that those signs were a warning we should have heeded. I still don't know who those people were or what they planned to do with our car and belongings. But one thing's for sure, I'll never ignore a warning sign again.